question is, how free are we? An overarching issue for the news media is the state of free speech. Article 19(1)(a) of the Indian Constitution guarantees freedom of speech and expression as a fundamental right. This right, hard won in the freedom struggle against a highly repressive and censorious British Raj, is unamendable. Freedom of the press is not explicitly mentioned by our Constitution, but the Supreme Court has, through judicial interpretation, read it into Article 19(1)(a). Unfortunately, freedom of speech and expression is hemmed in and to a significant extent undone by Article 19(2) of our Constitution. This provides for restrictions on the fundamental right by law, some reasonable, most not. Notable among the unreasonable restrictions that remain on the statute book or are in practice are the law of criminal defamation. We got it from the UK, you've done away with it, we still have it, and it's used in a big way. The undefined power of contempt of court, uncodified legislative privilege, the outrageous law of sedition, 124(a) of the Indian Penal Code, other illiberal provisions of the Indian Penal Code, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and other draconian laws enacted in the name of fighting extremism and terrorism. It's a global problem, and we share the worst of it. Free speech has come under serious pressure in India. Consider these examples from the past quarter century. Being the first country in the world to ban Salman Rushdie's satanic verses, and carrying through this policy of appeasement of murderous intolerance to the last Jaipur Literary Festival. Criminalizing paintings by India's greatest painter, M.F. Hussain, from 1996 onwards, forcing him into exile in West Asia. Carrying out several acts of localized violence and intimidation against media organizations, journalists, writers, historians, cartoonists, artists, activists, and others. Piling on criminal defamation cases against journalists, with the lower courts hardly applying their mind to prima facie admissibility even under this illiberal law, thus ensuring that the process is the punishment. Blocking text or SMS services in the name of law and order or public order. Notifying under the Information Technology Act 2000 as amended in 2008, illiberal rules, especially the notorious intermediary guideline rules which permit blocking of content on the internet. Threatening to tame the social media, which among other things shows a complete inability to understand the nature and ways of the sharing beast. Using the sedition law against the writer Arundhati Roy. Imprisoning a cartoonist for sedition, with the result that the Indian criminal justice system has itself become a cartoon gone viral on the World Wide Web. This is a period during which many voices within the Indian establishment and the larger media-consuming public are demanding accountability, transparency, better standards, an end to paid news and other rogue practices, and effective governance and regulation. The more discerning critical voices make the point that self-regulation either does not exist within the Indian media industry, or where it exists is not effective. Self-regulation, the Press Council chairman has proclaimed, is an oxymoron, and no profession can be called a profession unless it has an enforceable code of conduct and sanctions against those who violate it. So what can be the answer? It is likely that freedom of the Indian news media will come under increasing pressure and threat unless they move briskly to set their house in order. They need to ensure that transparency, accountability, and social responsibility are more than slogans. With no codes of values or practice binding journalists and the media industry, and no mechanisms for self-regulation, such as internal news ombudsman in place within major news organizations other than one or two, and I'm glad to say that in 2006, The Hindu adopted the Guardian model of the reader's editor, more or less adopting those terms of reference with very minor alterations. And now we have a third, we've just inducted a third reader's editor or internal news ombudsman in place, completely independent of the editorial, of the editor and the editorial personnel. Over the years, a substantial international literature has appeared on templates for socially and ethically accountable journalism, and also on the constitutive elements of journalism. This has yielded codes of practice, of professional ethics, privileging the principles and values of journalism. It has emphasized such disciplines as fact-checking, investigation, rigorous data sourcing and analysis, providing context and meaning, and maintaining perspective. India and its news media, I believe, can learn valuably from the parallel discussion of media-related issues taking place in the United Kingdom, which has been provoked by the rogue practices of an influential section of your media. The Leveson inquiry has been a stimulating learning experience for us. I follow it very closely. It allowing for the considerable differences in the situations. Many of the testimonies have been first-rate, and the inquiry has gone, I think, quite deep into what it calls the culture, practices, and ethics of the press. As a former editor, I am pleased that the forward-looking editor of The Guardian has welcomed Leveson as an opportunity for the industry to have a conversation with itself while also benefiting from the perspective and advice of others, and that several other British journalists seem to agree with this. I also know there are apprehensions. There was a recent editorial in The Telegraph which aired those apprehensions. We look forward to the final report or recommendations of Leveson and to seeing what legislative or other practical arrangements might follow. The Indian situation cries out for such an independent, comprehensive, hard look into the culture, practice, and ethics of the news media, and to questions of what kind of regulatory and governance mechanisms can be worked out and put in place. The object must be the same, and I quote from the Leveson's terms, to support integrity and freedom of the press while encouraging the highest ethical standards. Nobody knows what the long term holds for India's news media. It should be possible through some kind of regulation, whether it is self-regulation or some kind of statutory regulation going beyond the Press Council, to reform the system, to put an end to the major ethical transgressions, not to mention rogue practices, such as paid news. But I have no illusions about what it will take to reverse the tendencies that put enormous pressure on independent professional journalism. My personal hope is that feel-good journalism, focus group-led journalism, ad-dictated journalism, journalism that sees no need to take account of basic realities, and in the Indian case, the mass poverty and the multiple deprivations in a country where 2/3 of the population subsist on less than $2 a day, that this can be discredited by good, sensitive, progressive journalism that attracts a substantial measure of public support. Perhaps Gresham's law can be disproved when it comes to journalism, at least in certain sectors and enough spaces. My hope is that effective incentives, moral and material, can be put in place in significant sections of the news media for taking up the basic concerns of hundreds of millions of ordinary Indians and projecting them with social responsibility into the public sphere. Thank you.